We heard from the press conference on Friday from the president, plenty of rhetoric, but not a whole lot of substance. Was this announcement a bit of a non-event?
I think after the administration made such a big deal about the fact that they were going to come out with a statement, it was a bit surprising to see the lack of detail in the president's statement. The fact that he would have to say something, given that Secretary of State Pompeo had been clear that the administration couldn't certify Hong Kong's autonomy anymore, was obvious. And although the president said very clearly that there was sort of the full range of options on the table in terms of revoking Hong Kong's special status, the fact that you saw that lack of detail, I think, suggests that there may be some ongoing decisions to be made about how exactly they plan to implement what they're going to do going forward.
Hong Kong special trading status. We had the likes of Goldman saying it's not all or nothing. Is the U.S. likely more going to target the policy changes that are more targeted, I should say, not just kind of putting Hong Kong and China under the same umbrella? Is it more going to be more of a targeted type of sanctions than anything?
Well, we did see remarks from administration officials earlier in the week saying that the U.S. was looking at a targeted approach. And I think that this does reflect not just the trade and the business interests between the U.S. and Hong Kong, but also I think a reality that across the U.S. government there is a desire to respond to China's actions, but also to recognize that people want to do that in a way that doesn't actually hurt the Hong Kong people. So certainly I hope that they will continue to follow through with something that looks like a targeted approach. But the president's remarks, being as sweeping as they are, I think does raise some questions about whether that is still what they plan to do moving forward.
Lindsey, sanctions against China could hurt the U.S. itself. Is that complicating the kind of choices that the U.S. has in terms of what it can do to China? Both are interdependent, and decoupling really does not benefit either side.
I think that I think this is why we talk about things being targeted, because certainly you don't want to do things in a way that is harmful, as I said, to the Hong Kong people, but also the United States has its own interests. And certainly the administration is going to be taking that into account. However, I do think that in the last several months, certainly since some of the frustration about the coronavirus outbreak and how that was handled initially have accelerated, I think there has been a little more acceptance in the United States that some degree of economic decoupling is likely, and it's a question about how you do that in a way that makes the most sense and does the less harm.
Lindsey, is there an exit in sight? Is there any indication at all that either one or the other is looking for an exit?
Well, I do think you did not see the president say anything about the phase one trade deal between the U.S. and China. And I do think that's telling. Certainly, both the United States and China are facing economic challenges coming out of the pandemic. And so there is an incentive to, I think, for the governments to prevent those arrangements from derailing. However, I do think that the hardening domestic sentiment that we see on both sides does make it difficult. So if there is a specific exit plan in mind, I don't know that we've seen the governments articulate what that is yet.
Lindsey, you mentioned that the development we saw last week from the UK to offer visa extensions and a path to citizenship for B&O holders here in Hong Kong is a significant one. Yes, it is, but we still have about 1.4 million Hong Kong residents that were born after 97 and perhaps are not eligible for BNO status. We've heard countries like Taiwan, the U.S., Canada, Australia kind of say that they're willing to perhaps ease some of their immigration policies in support of Hong Kong. Do you expect those countries to honor their words? I mean, these are many countries that are also facing retaliation from Beijing as well.
I certainly hope they will, and I think the fact that countries are talking about this is a significant step. To me, that's the kind of step that hopefully, again, recognizes that you don't want the consequences of what's going on to fall down solely on the Hong Kong people who have not caused this situation. And I think, though certainly there's been concern in places like Canada and Australia about retaliation from Beijing, I think what you've seen in the last couple of months is a greater willingness to speak up on these issues. You've seen this in light of the coronavirus outbreak with Australia's stance in the World Health Organization and speaking up more vocally there. So I do think you've seen some of these countries be a little more willing to speak up and take a stance despite concerns about retaliation from Beijing.